If you've never been on night duty at a lighthouse, you don't understand the silence. Harlow begins his story in a slow, hoarse voice that seems to blend into the sound of the waves. We meet in a Portland waterfront cafe on a chilly December afternoon. When asked why he wants to tell the story, he simply replies, "I've kept it in my head for so long. I need someone to listen." He was once the lighthouse keeper at Blackwater Point Light, an isolated lighthouse on the Maine coast, nearly 3 miles from the mainland. It was built in 1894, perched on a frost-bitten rock outcrop with no road, only a weekly supply boat. Harlow worked there for exactly 1 year, from April 1978 to April 1979. But that November 1978, he says, is what has stayed with him all his life. "You have to understand," he said, "that many lighthouses were automated in those days, but Blackwater Point was not. It still used a clockwork mechanism, and it still required someone to wind the ropes, clean the Fresnel lenses, and check the fuel. It only required one person, and that year, that person was me." Life there was very lonely. No telephones, no two-way radio except in emergencies. Just the lighthouse logbook, an old wooden bunker for a bedroom, and a spiral steel staircase leading up to the light. Supply boats arrived every Tuesday. Everything else was quiet. The waves and the light rotated every 10 seconds. I used to think I was good at being alone, but Blackwater had the kind of silence where you couldn't tell if it was wind or human voices. And then came November. On the 9th of November 1978, at 2 a.m., Harlow was checking the lenses when he heard a knock, knock, knock from the sea. 3 beats, as if someone were tapping on the hull of the boat. He stepped out onto the balcony and shone his flashlight down. The sea was pitch black. No boat, no lights, nothing. "The sound came from the water," he said. It was clear. It wasn't the sound of waves. He wrote in his diary, 2:04 a.m. heard 3 beats from the west. Source unknown. 7 nights later, it came back, but this time closer, as if someone were tapping right at the foot of the cliff. On the night of November 18, the wind was strong, and the waves crashed against the shore like mad beasts. Around 1:30 a.m., as he turned the watch to keep the flashlight spinning, he looked down at the southern reef, where even low tide couldn't stand, and he saw a figure standing still, looking up at the lighthouse. Not a reflection, not an illusion, he said firmly. The man was standing at the water's edge, his shirt dark, his head bowed. I remember it clearly because the lights flashed and his shadow doubled on the rock. He rushed down to the first floor, turned on his headlamp, but when the light came on, there was no one there. Footprints. Impossible. The rock was slippery. The waves were so strong that no one could stand there for more than 10 seconds without being swept away. He wrote in his diary, 1:38 a.m. saw shadow on the South Beach. Lost track shortly after. The notebook had a smudge. The handwriting was shaky, as if he had tried to write quickly. Blackwater at an emergency radio at 2,182 kilohertzes. It was rarely used. But on the night of November 22, at exactly 2 a.m., the radio crackled. Then a man's voice, small and drawn out. Light off. Don't let it go. Don't let it go dark. Then silence. Only the sound of the wind. Harlow tried calling back. Blackwater Point. Listen clearly. No answer. He checked the light. It was still working. No short. No problem. The next day, he tried the frequency again. No signal. But the next night at the same time, the voice appeared again, clearer. Harlow, keep the light. Keep the light. I never said my name on the radio, he said softly. No one knew my name to call on that frequency. On the 24th of November, 1978, a fierce storm came from the northeast. Waves were nearly 10 feet high. Rain lashed the ship. When the storm had subsided around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Harlow looked out to sea and saw a piece of the ship's hull stuck on the rocks. He had to wait until the tide went down until evening to check. It was a section of wooden bow, about 10 feet long, hollow, as if torn off. The inscription on the hull read, SS Margot, 1912. He had been working in the area for almost a year and had never heard of the ship. No papers, no sinking records, no missing person reports with the same name. I took a flashlight and looked inside, he said. There was something in there, against the edge of the wood. It was a small bronze bell, heavy and unusually cold, even though he was standing in the near-zero temperatures. He stuffed the bell in his coat pocket and carried it up to the lighthouse. That night, when he set the bell on the table, it rang softly, though no one had touched it. Just one word, knock. Harlow slept on the lower bunk. The steel staircase leading up to the lighthouse was the heart of the building. On the night of November 24, at 3 a.m., he heard footsteps, slow, steady, up one step at a time. He thought someone had entered the lighthouse, as had happened to sailors in distress seeking shelter. But when he opened the bedroom door, the dark hallway was empty. The footsteps continued, but now above, as if someone were coming up to the light. If it were real, I would have heard the wind when they opened the main door. But I heard nothing. Just footsteps. He took his flashlight and climbed up. With each step he took, the footsteps above him quickened, as if someone was trying to avoid being seen. There was no one at the top. Only the Fresnel lens slowly rotating, and the light pulsed like a loud heartbeat. When he turned back and looked down the stairs, he saw a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs on the first floor. He looked up. It didn't move. When he blinked, the figure was gone. On November 26, the supply boat brought food and mail. Among them was an old yellowed envelope from a man named Leonard Hale, the former lighthouse keeper who retired in 1962. Inside the envelope were 7 photocopied diary pages. Harlow said his hand shook as he read the first line. In November at Blackwater, the light went down when the sea began to talk. The following pages recorded similar events. A triple tap from the sea, a figure standing on the rocks, a voice calling into the radio, footsteps up the stairs, and the last line: don't let the light go out. If it goes out, it will get inside. That night, the wind changed direction. The triple tap came again. The 29th of November 1978 was the worst night of his life. At about 1:13 a.m., as Harlow was making his entry, the lighthouse stopped. It was never supposed to happen. He ran up to the lighthouse. The crank was jammed. The clockwork was off. When he held the flashlight to the shaft, the bronze bell he had picked up from the wreck was lying there between the gears. No way, he said. I left it on the first floor. No one climbed up in front of me. He threw the bell to the corner of the room, turned on the emergency dial. The light came back after nearly 30 seconds, long enough for any ship out at sea to get into trouble. When he went back down to the second floor, the radio came on. A man's voice. Clear. You shouldn't. Let it stop. He froze. The voice sounded wet, like someone speaking from underwater. At about 2:40 a.m., as he sat in the kitchen, a strong wind shook the window. He looked up and saw a figure standing just outside the glass. Tall, thin, head tilted, water running down his shirt. But what caught his breath was this. It was standing at the window, facing the cliff, where there was no way to stand. When he turned on the light, the shadow disappeared. Only the water on the glass was left in the shape of a long, narrow hand. On December 2, Harlow left Blackwater Point Light on his own decision, reporting it unfit for duty. But that was not the end of it. In March 1979, a research team surveyed the waters below the lighthouse and discovered a section of the bow identical to the one Harlow had found, but larger and deeper. Inside it, they found a skeleton wearing a sailor's jacket, still holding a bronze bell. On the bell's handle was engraved SS Margot 1912 Lightkeeper Hale, the name of the previous lighthouse keeper. He had quitté in 1962 and had never been found. I left Blackwater in a hurry, he said, but every year in November, I hear the 3-beat knock from the sea. Sometimes in my window, sometimes in my dreams. He said quietly, there are lighthouses that do more than just give light. They hold something in the darkness. And once they possess you, they don't need the sea to find you. When the interview ended, he handed me an object wrapped in a towel, a small brass bell. Cold. I want you to keep it, he said. I don't want it in my house another night. I took it home, writing this at 3 a.m. in my Portland rental room. I swear I heard the faintest click of a bell in the towel. There are places where there shouldn't be any light at night. Ainsley says it in his thick Scottish accent, deep and sea breezy. We meet at a bar in Edinburgh, where he's asked me to meet him one September evening, when the city is shrouded in a light mist. He says he never planned to tell this story to anyone until he learned I was collecting the True Lighthouse Incidents series. Hollow Reef is not a place for humans, he says. It seems to push everything out, including the light. Hollow Reef Light, about 4 miles off the north coast of Scotland, was built in 1905. It stands on a small cluster of rocks, battered by waves all year round, and is famous for the disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers in 1934 without a trace. It's a similar story to the Flannan Isles, but less well known. Ainsley worked there in 1991 when the lighthouse was not yet fully automated. The shift lasted 2 weeks straight, with no one to replace him. No boat, no radio, except the emergency channel. But what I remember most, he says, is not the loneliness. It's the things that can't be lonely. On the 3rd of October 1991, Ainsley was taken by small boat to the lighthouse. The captain instructed, if there's a north wind, don't go up to the lighthouse after midnight. That wind carries something you shouldn't listen to. Ainsley thought it was some old seaman's joke. But as he climbed the stairs of Hollow Reef, he felt the tower shake slightly, as if something was waiting. Inside the lighthouse were a small bedroom, an old kitchen, a diesel generator, and a steel spiral staircase leading up to the Fresnel Len. As night fell, he sat in the engine room, listening to the waves crashing against the rocks and the wind howling through the chimney. The first night went fine, he said, but the second night, Hollow Reef came to life. About 1:15 a.m., while checking the generator, Ainsley heard a knocking sound just outside the wall, 3 times in a row. Knock, knock, higher above the waterline. Not a wave. He opened the door and looked. No one. A cold wind blew in, stinging his face. He stepped out onto the railing, shone his flashlight down onto the rocks, and there were no footprints. But the knocking came again, this time right under the railing, like someone was clinging to the rock wall and knocking, demanding to be let in. He closed the door and locked the 2 latches. Outside, the knocking continued 6 more times and then stopped. On the 4th day, while cleaning out his old closet, Ainsley found a leather-bound notebook covered in sea salt dust. The cover read, Logbook A. McLaren, 1972. Ainsley flipped through it. The page dated the 10th of December, 1972 read, 1:12 a.m. 3 beat knock from the wall. Unidentified. Loose stone, perhaps? 1:45 heard footsteps on the railing. No one in sight. Another page. North wind with a human voice. Can't hear it clearly, but it sounded like someone was calling my name. Ainsley laughed bitterly as he recounted this part. His name was McLaren, but in the diary, he recorded times he heard his name called. And the strange fact was, my name was also Ainsley McLaren. No relation. Just the same name. He said it sent a chill down his spine that very evening. On the 5th night, around 2 a.m., when Ainsley went up to the tower to check the rotating mechanism, he happened to look down at the round window on the middle floor, down in the stone courtyard where the waves were constantly crashing. There was a man standing there. His shirt was dark, no lights, standing still in the middle of the rock, where the water could wash him away at any moment. No one can stand there at high tide, he said. No one can stand there. without getting wet. And the strangest thing, the man looked up at me, but I couldn't see his face, only emptiness. Ainsley ran downstairs. When he opened the door, the wind blew so hard that it pushed him back. There was no one under the rock, but he saw 4 footprints on the rock, straight and dry. He took a flashlight and looked at them. The footprints pointed towards the lighthouse wall. There were no signs of them leaving. On the 7th day, the weather turned stormy. Wind gusts of 8, white waves. At about 1:50 a.m., the radio turned on, even though the switch was off. A male voice said,
"McLaren, get on. A chill."
Ran down Ainsley's spine. The voice was hoarse, the final syllables broken, as if choked by water. And most importantly, it called him by name. He replied, "This is Hollow Reef Light." "Who's speaking?" The radio crackled. Then the voice whispered,
"The light is dim."
He ran up to the light tower. The light was perfectly normal. The lens wasn't dirty. The rotation mechanism was stable. When he looked down at the railing, someone had just stood there. Water was still dripping. On the 8th day, Ainsley saw that the 2nd floor window was covered in condensation from outside, even though it was dry. On the condensation, there was a long, crooked handprint. The fingers bent, as if dented. He put his hand up to compare. No match. The handprint on the glass was half a span bigger than him. There's no way anyone could have climbed up to the 2nd floor from the outside. In the evening, while cleaning the kitchen, he heard a metal sound. At the foot of the stairs was a small brass bell, the kind used to signal fog. Ainsley did not own it. There were no missing bells in the lighthouse. He picked it up. The bell was cold as ice, even though he had left it near the stove. And when he set it down on the table, it rang slightly. Knock. The 9th night, at exactly 12:43 a.m., the wind changed direction. North wind. Ainsley was sleeping when the radio came on. "Don't go up to the lighthouse." He held his breath. The voice was unlike any he had ever heard. It was like someone shouting from underwater. "Ainsley, don't go up." Then there was a loud banging on the 1st floor door. Knock, knock, knock. He got up, took the lamp, and approached the door. No one was there, but outside was a handprint, long, made of seawater. On the radio, the voice changed. "McLaren, come up here." He looked up at the ceiling. On the spiral steel staircase, someone had just come up. The footsteps were clear. Ainsley ran after him, but the stairs were wet, as if someone had just stepped out of deep water. When he reached the lamp room, he saw the door was ajar. The light rotated steadily, but there was a shadow standing in the middle of the lens. A figure, at least a head taller than him. When the light rotated, the shadow rotated, but no one was level with the lens. He backed away, but the tower door slammed shut behind him. The wind inside blew up as if from the bottom of the tower, so strong that it knocked him down. The light stopped. No more rotating. The light went out in a flash. In the darkness, he heard, "The light is out." It was the same voice as in the McLaren 1972 diary. Then, silence. There was only his own breathing and a slow step behind him. On the 10th day, Ainsley decided to go down to the Lighthouse Foundation to check the spindle, suspecting that something was stuck. When he shined the light, he saw a wooden plank had shifted, revealing a hollow space filled with salt water. And in that hollow space, he found a pair of old leather boots, a sailor's jacket, and a wet piece of paper, faintly written, "Don't let it in." The water rose, touching the edge of the floor, as if about to overflow. Ainsley closed the lid and locked it. On the 11th night, at 3:17 a.m., the lighthouse light went out completely. There was no mechanical reason, no strong wind, no collision. From the radio, a voice whispered, "It's in." The railing shook violently. The stairs echoed with footsteps running up. Ainsley tried to turn on the backup generator. It took almost 40 seconds, which felt like an eternity. When the lights came back on, he turned to look at the tower door. Outside, on the stone floor, there was a man standing looking up. No blinks, no movement, no reflection in the eyes. But what made him leave Hollow Reef forever was this. The man was wearing the exact sailor shirt he'd found on the stone floor, the one from 1934. Ainsley was picked up by the boat on the last day, on schedule. The captain looked at him, his face pale. "You've been up there, alone for 2 weeks?" Ainsley nodded. The captain replied, "They picked you up on the radio 2 nights ago, but the signal came from the bottom of the tower, not the radio room." Ainsley said no more. "When I checked the records, there were 3 lighthouse keepers missing in 1934. Thomas Blade, Ian Crow, Arthur McLaren. The last name matched the logger Ainsley found. I found a copy of the radio message the captain had recorded in 1991. The recorded frequency, transmit source, Hollow Reef basement level. Although the lighthouse had no basement. I asked Ainsley, "Do you think it's a ghost?" He said, "No, I think it's someone who hasn't left duty, and Hollow Reef is where they're kept, not the sea. When you stand at the lighthouse at night," he said, "you see the light spinning like a beating heart. But in some places, that heart isn't beating for the ship. It's beating for something else." He said that years later, when he returned to Edinburgh, he would sometimes hear 3 knocks on the wall in the middle of the night. The same rhythm as at Hollow Reef. Sometimes, he said, it doesn't want to hurt anyone. It just wants people to spend the night with it. Some nights, I feel like the light isn't shining out at the sea. It's shining on me. I met Collins in a small fishing village in Newfoundland, where people still remember the days when the sea swallowed ships and people. He lives in a wooden house next to a cliff, its roof silver, and the wind whistling through it like a taut rope. When I asked him why he left the Arrowsmith Bay Lighthouse after only 1 winter, he sighed. "Have you ever walked into a place where you felt like it knew you were there?" I was silent. He began to tell me. The Arrowsmith Bay Lighthouse was built in 1911 on the east coast of Newfoundland, right next to a deep bay that was an important route for fishing boats in the previous century. But it has a bad reputation. In 1922, the larkspur disappeared near the bay. 1949. The Dwyer brothers' fishing boat disappeared, leaving only its bow adrift. 1967. Lighthouse keeper Walter Finn disappeared without a trace. People talk about white fog in the bay, Collins said. A fog that doesn't follow the wind. It drifts as if it has a purpose, as if it's looking for someone. Collins was appointed to replace the previous keeper, Henry Walsh, who abruptly resigned after only 10 months on the job. Walsh said only, when handing over the job, "Don't open the door after midnight. Don't bother knocking." And then he left that morning, never to return. Collins entered the lighthouse for the first time on the 17th of October, 1983. Inside were a small bedroom, a kitchen, a generator room, and a system of wooden stairs leading up to the lighthouse tower. Immediately, he realized something. The space inside was too cold compared to the temperature outside. It felt like the floor below was hollow. In the kitchen cupboard, Collins found an old, cracked, leather-bound notebook. which read, Lightkeeper Log W. Finn, 1960. 6 to 1967. Walter Finn was missing. He turned to the last page he could read. If the fog rises from the west, don't let the light touch it. If a voice calls from the water, don't answer it. And if anyone knocks after midnight, pray that there's no moon. Collins said. I read it and laughed. I thought he was superstitious. But I kept the notebook and later found out I was lucky. On his third night shift at 2:14 a.m., Collins looked out a second-floor window and saw white fog beginning to gather in the middle of the bay. It wasn't fog, drifting with the wind. It swirled like a whirlpool, then drifted toward the lighthouse. Looking at it, I didn't think it was fog. I thought it was something trying to get to shore. The lighthouse beams swept around, touching the fog. For a moment, Collins saw a silhouette standing in the fog, straight and long, motionless. Just a second, then it was gone. He felt as if someone had just looked back at him. On Friday, as Collins slept, he heard footsteps on the steps outside his door, slow and heavy, like someone wearing wet shoes. He turned on the light. There was no one outside, only water dripping down the steps, following the long footprints, heading straight for the door. But only the tracks coming in, no tracks going out. No boat came ashore that night, Collins insisted. No one could stand on the rocks without being swept away. The next morning, the shoe prints were gone, as if they had never existed. On the night of October 24, around 1:30 a.m., Collins heard what sounded like someone breathing from just below the light tower. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the sound of the wooden floor. It was a slow, steady, breathing sound close to his ear. When he turned the light down, there was no one. But when he turned the light off, the breathing came again. It was breathing as if it was very close, but not visible. He ran down to the first floor. When he opened the door to the engine room, he saw that the wooden floor was wet, as if someone had just walked through it with wet clothes. There were handprints on the wall, long, cold, and faintly printed as if they had been made with seawater. On November 3, at exactly 2 a.m., the radio in the kitchen came on, even though the switch was off. A man's voice broke, muffled, Lightkeeper. Don't let the light go dark. Collins replied, Aerosmith Bay Light. Who's talking? The other voice. You're not alone there. It's rising. The signal died. The radio went silent again. Collins felt a chill run down his spine. He ran up to the lighthouse to check. The light was still working, but the wooden stairs were soaked with water, as if someone had climbed them just minutes before him. A week later, a clacking sound began to be heard directly under the bedroom, like a rhythmic thumping from a hollow space. Collins used a flashlight and a knife to pry open an old floorboard in the corner of the room. Under the floorboard, a hollow space nearly half a meter deep. Inside were an old rubber boot, a torn piece of sailor's jacket, and a brass foghorn coated with white salt. When he picked it up, the whistle vibrated slightly, even though no one was blowing it. Puff. A very small, thin, long-lasting sound. Collins dropped it and quickly closed the lid. The night of November 15th, strong wind. Waves crashed against the cliffs like thunder. Collins slept a little, then knocked on the door. 3 beats. Slow, regular. He trembled. No one was allowed to go to the lighthouse at night, except in case of shipwreck. He took the lantern and approached the door. Who was there? No one answered. But when he pressed his ear to the door, the sound changed to a knocking sound from inside, right next to his head. Collins recoiled as if being pulled by a rope. Outside, I repeated. No boat. No people, no way up. November 21st was the night of the thickest white fog. The lighthouse lamp could not penetrate the swallowed light. Collins looked down the bay. In the mist, there was the shadow of a man standing about 30 meters from the lighthouse. Not blurred, not hidden. Clear, tall, thin, arms hanging at his sides. The wind blew his shirt, but his hair did not move. I knew it was not a living person, Collins said, because the sea was up to his chest and he was still standing. When Collins shone the light up the tower, the moment the light swept over, Collins saw the eyes, completely black, no whites. The 26th of November 1983 was Collins's last day working at Aerosmith. At 1:47 a.m., the lighthouse suddenly went out. There was no flicker, no strong wind. He ran up to the tower. The stairs were wet. The handrails were dripping. When he arrived, he saw an unforgettable sight. The Fresnel lens was turned the wrong way, as if someone had pushed it by hand. The auxiliary light wouldn't turn on either. He had to use the hand crank mechanism to turn it back on. As he turned it, the sound of a door opening echoed from the first floor below. Crack. Then footsteps coming up. The steps were slow and heavy, as if the legs were heavy against the body. Collins turned the light until his hands were numb. The light turned on. The lighthouse lit up again. The footsteps stopped immediately. He looked down the spiral staircase hole. Someone was standing at the foot of the stairs, looking up. No face, just a dark figure standing in the light. When he blinked, it disappeared. When he returned to the mainland, Collins filed a report of unusual light outage. But when asked about the missing lighthouse keeper of 1967, Walter Finn, Collins heard from a former employee. They never found his body, but they found the sailor's jacket he used to wear, caught on the ledge just below the lighthouse tower. Dry, not a trace of salt. It is assumed that Mr. Finn fell into the sea, but the Newfoundland Sea does not return dry goods. Never. Collins knows that, and he thinks he knows who he met in the white mist on that night. At the end of the interview, Collins hands me something from his pocket. A brass foghorn, ice cold. He says, "I brought it back from Arrow's Mouth. It's been with me for 30 years. Every winter, I hear it ringing in the night, even when there's no wind. Take it. I don't want it in my house another season. I take the whistle, light, cold, and when I put it on the table, it made a noise. Fey, like someone had blown in from afar." Collins looked at me. "If you hear 3 knocks, don't open the door. Aerosmith is still looking for the night watchman.